Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone and welcome to episode 349 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. And today's episode is on should you try ketamine-assisted psychotherapy? And it is Saturday, the 11th of October 2025 as I record it. So, today's podcast episode was one that I've been wanting to do for a while because something that I've noticed as a student who used to do a lot of the psychology open days at the university. Granted, I should say former student because I've graduated, but I've actually got my graduation in November. Anyway, sorry going off on a tangent. There's been a bigger focus here in my personal life because ordering gowns was a nightmare. Anyway, so when I was doing the psychology open days at the university, lots of people would come up to me. They would ask about psychedelics and whether we offered any education on this form of psychological therapy. Now, I have many talents. I'm able to answer many questions about the University of Kent and their psychology program, but psychedelics and ketamine is not one of them, especially because when it comes to open days, you've sort of got to strike a balance between being very honest but putting the university in a good light. So I had to sort of say something along the lines of, no, we currently don't offer that, but the lecturers are very interested, they're very passionate, and if you want to talk to them about it, then I know they'll be more than happy to. To be honest, I'm pretty sure that wasn't my answer. I'm sure my actual answer was a lot better, but off the top of my head, that's all that I've got. So I would often just pass these students off on to other academics. But it still shows that ketamine and other psychedelic forms of psychotherapy are becoming a lot more popular, a lot more mainstream. This is what I wanted to do today's podcast episode, just so I could explore it and understand it more for myself and share that knowledge with all of you. Now, I did look at the backlist of the podcast episode, and back in 2022, I did a podcast episode called How Can Ketamine Be Combined with a Psychotherapy? Something along those lines. And I actually talk a lot more depth about the benefits of ketamine and its use in a psychological therapy, how it works, and a bunch of other stuff. So if you enjoyed today's episode, definitely go and check out that one. But by the end of today's podcast episode, we're going to understand how does the ketamine-assisted therapy work? What does a typical session look like? Should you try ketamine-assisted psychotherapy? Who shouldn't try it? And something that I'm really interested in, how is ketamine-assisted psychotherapy used across the world? So today I write up quick sections on how it works in the US, the United Kingdom, Australia, China, and Brazil, because I really do love cross-cultural research and cross-cultural contexts. So I loved it. It's a brilliant episode. So you got that to look forward to in the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the psychology news section, we've written from the British Psychological Society Research Digest, and the first one is, does a quick response beat soothing a crying baby? If you have a baby and they start crying, what should you do? Countless books on parenting offer often conflicting advice. What the research tells us is that the way we react to a young child's distress can affect its development, with the children of more responsive parents generally faring better. However, The vast majority of work in this field has been conducted in North America and Europe. Now, the authors of a new paper in developmental psychology, and one recent meta analysis, for example, only 2% of the studies include samples from Africa and South America. In a bid to help address this inequality, a team at the University of Durham ran a cross-cultural investigation of material responsiveness on a pair of 82 pairs of mothers and babies, with one group in the UK and another in Uganda. This work reveals some cross-cultural differences in how the mothers responded to their babies and also how quickly the babies settled. Okay, so I won't go into the actual study and its results any more than that. But as I talk about in my book, Developmental Psychology, there are some very key cross-cultural differences. And to be honest, the West have some very weird parental rituals and some very weird parenting behaviors compared to the rest of the world. For example, in the Western world, we actually have a nursery for our children, and that's really weird because because only 10% of the world's population actually does that. The other 90% will sleep with their babies, and this is known to foster better attachment and a lot of other psychosocial benefits for the child. So that's actually quite strange. And whenever there's a death in the West related to this parent sleeping with their child, the massive companies that make thousands, no, actually, to be honest, millions from selling like nursery stuff, baby wear, and other stuff. They always like to publicize it, just so parents keep buying their nursery stuff. So, the worst thing for those companies is that if everyone starts sleeping with their babies because of the psychosocial benefits, then to be honest, they're going to be out of a business. And I think I was going to say like a lot more, but I think my mind's just gone absolutely blank, blank for some reason though. But it's an interesting finding, and I think that this is very much about being mindful about all of our actions. And I would definitely say that we should be the responsive parents, and the responding to our child's needs is also really important. But I know in the past of the podcast episodes, I have actually done a podcast on the mental health of mothers. So I think that yes, we've absolutely got to respond to our kids. We cannot neglect them. Child neglect is absolutely wrong on all levels. Yet, I think that we've also got to be balanced in terms of that, like the childcare shouldn't always be down to the mother or the primary caregiver. We've actually got to like spread it out though. This is why it's so hard for single parents because single parents they've got to do everything, so they often neglect their own mental health though, and this has negative mental health outcomes for them, but also their child. So I would also say that just please look after yourself, practice self care, and just try and like dish it out evenly. Try and dish out the childcare responsibilities as equally as you possibly can, just so you're not burnt out and you are able to quickly and effectively respond to your children's needs. So the second one is more social people perceive more daily events. If you think back over your day so far, does it seem it's been packed with lots of individual events, or does it feel more like one a stretch? More recent research suggests that two given people who have undergone the same day experience may have perceived their passing differently, with some dividing pastime into more discrete chunks than others. There's also evidence that differences in event segmentation, as is known, could affect other aspects of our cognition, including our ability to navigate and our long-term memory. This, researchers at the Royal Holloway University of London and their colleagues believe, makes it more important to understand what might drive them. In a recent paper in iScience, they make effort to do just that. Okay, so personally, as much as I like this idea, my mind goes to something else. Also, because yes, I can definitely understand that if you're more social and if you're more extroverted, then you are a lot more likely to be able to divide up your day into more categorical chunks. Mainly because I can't say the word discrete, and because of my dyslexia, I'm not sure if the word even is discrete. But we all have our flaws, and we rise above them. So if you're more social, then you're more likely to be doing stuff. You're more likely to be going like to different places, and you're more likely to be interacting with like more people. And each of those conversations and each of those social interactions, you're much more likely to see them as individual chunks. So I think out of habit, you could just be so used to dividing up your day into more chunks and remembering all the different things that you did. So if you want to go the same day and the same experience as a less social person, just out of habit, you might notice more people. But something that I find a little skeptical about this though, is that I'm a very social person. So in all fairness, I probably just like to feed into this. That I'm not extremely social. I'm more quite average as social, but because I do so many different things, then I do tend to divide up my day in like chunks, different sections, because that's just how I work. Equally, this is because of the autism. I like structure, I like routine, I like to get a lot of stuff done. So I do like to be productive. And if I'm having a honest conversation, not with someone about what I do, because to be honest, if you say that you do writing, publishing, psychology, podcasting, and everything else, like if I tell people what I actually did most of the time, they would be quite mind blown because I do so much, and they're like, "Oh wow, that's really interesting." Like, tell me more, then it would lead to a massive long like conversation, which is great. Great, but it's just sometimes I don't want to explain the like intricacies about what I do every day. So anyway, so I would say that yes, yes, I am slightly more social than you would typically think as an autistic person, but I wouldn't say that I'm constantly going out. I'm constantly seeking a social connection. So I think there are definitely some individual differences between this. Just some food for thought. And I think at the end of this psychology news article, after this podcast episode, take a moment, think about your day, and try and think about everything that you've done. And of course, there can be like some bias, obviously, but try and like think about how many segments can you divide your day into, and then consider how social or antisocial you are. And like, there's no judgment here. Because there are some days I'm really antisocial. Like, I'm perfectly happy not seeing a single person or talking to anyone. So the last one is overconfidence thrives even with detailed continuous feedback. Overconfidence has been dubbed, open quote, the most significant of the cognitive biases, close quote, with research suggesting that it contributes to poor decisions in fields such as medicine, financial investing, political leadership, and management, know the authors of a recent paper in Psychological Science. Various ideas about what causes this bias have been proposed. One theory is that if we don't receive good objective feedback, it's hard to make accurate judgments about ourselves. If your partner tells you that you're really smart or a wonderful cook, for example, whether that's true or not, you might well believe them. Patrick R. Heck and colleagues set out to investigate whether a lack of quality feedback really could be to blame in their latest publication. Okay, so I won't go into the article any more than that, but overconfidence is definitely one of the most major cognitive biases because I think we see it in everyday life, not only politics, because this is not a political show, so I'm not going to go into that, but let's just say politicians very overconfident and they do tend to make horrific decisions. Anyway, anyway though, but when it comes to like management, all of us have been in jobs, all of us have had to work with peers and colleagues who are in very overconfident in their abilities, and in reality, they're quite bad at their jobs. And we're like, how did you manage to get that good at your job? Or how did you manage to get promoted that well? Well, that was like, I remember working with a person earlier in the year, and all of us were like, how how did this person get onto this team? Because they're awful. They are awful at this job. Like the students don't like them, the teachers don't like them, and everything else. So we managed to conclude that it's probably because this person probably interviews really, really well. So that's something that was quite useful. But overconfidence is definitely something that we've all got to like work on. It's something that we've all got to be aware of and mindful about. But to be honest, like if you're questioning overconfidence, to be honest, you're very likely not to be overconfident yourself. So I think we've got to like keep researching it. We've got to keep coming up with interventions. And I think something that would be quite useful is if there was an intervention that people could come up with and something that they could use on someone else to sort of decrease that person's overconfidence over time though. Granted, I think we've got to be careful because, like, let's say you've got a boss who's really overconfident in their people management skills, and you're in a customer relationship role. And whenever your boss talks to clients, they end up walking away thinking, "Oh my god, I hate this company. That guy was unbearable." So let's just use that as an egg example. But your boss thinks that they are amazing and that they're God's gift to the world. So I think it would be useful if there was an intervention or something we could use to sort of decrease that boss's confidence. But I think that we've also got to be careful because you really don't want to edge into it being emotional abuse or invalidation or something that's actually going to harm that particular boss. Because I think, like all interventions, whether this is technology, whether this is the internet, or to be honest, anything that comes from psychology or science, it can be a double edged sword though because if we think about the internet is amazing. I love it. It allows me to podcast and run my business, but it can also be extremely harmful because of cyberbullying and terrorism and cyber security threats. So that's something to consider. So I think that whatever interventions that we create to sort of counteract overconfidence, we've got to be careful that it maximizes the benefits in terms of decreasing overconfidence, but we minimize the harm that someone with malicious intent could use it. So just some food for thought. So I hope you enjoy this psychology news section. So let's move on to the personal update. So we're moving on to the personal update. So this week has been a little weird, but a lot of fun and lots of good things have happened about it. So this week I've not started my new job because there's a bit of a reference issue. And I want to talk about this just in case it happens to anyone else. And if anyone's got any ideas that could help me overcome this issue, I would be very, very grateful. So, the reason why I've not started my new job is because two of my references have not come back. So, and one of them is from my old university, so I know that will get done at some point. But the other reference was from a work experience placement I did with the learning disabilities team 2 years ago. Now, the woman who's in charge of that, she was brilliant, very extremely busy. I don't even know if she still works for the NHS Trust. So the email I gave her, so the email that I gave the new job, I don't know if that email is even monitored, if it even works. So until that reference actually comes back, I can't start my new job, which is an issue because one, I can't start, I can't earn money, I can't start getting that experience, but also it also means that I have no idea when I'm going to be able to start this a new job. It could be next week, could be next month, could be next year, etc. Which I admit is like pain, simply because I've passed everything else. I've signed the contract. I've done the little bit of that training that they sent me beforehand. I've done my DBS check, which for our international audience basically means that you've never been charged or you've never done anything criminal with vulnerable people. So that's sort of like a thing though. So I'm more than able to start this new job. It's just these two references that have not come back yet. So at some point I may or may not start this new job. So in other news, I've been doing lots of other projects, which has been a lot of fun. I've finished off some new psychology books. I'm really looking forward to releasing them in 2026, and we cover a whole host of really fun topics, which I know that you're going to love. Plus, on Monday, I also went to the Natural History Museum with someone special. It was a great day, really fun. If you're ever in like London, I really do recommend that you go to the Natural History Museum because I've not been there for 15 years, I'll say, but it's really good. There's lots of dinosaurs, lots of oh my god, there's so much. So lots of rocks and minerals, a whole bunch of other stuff. And if you go with a biology graduate, then they can talk your ears off about it, and it's a lot of fun, and it's really, really interesting. And as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwiley@connorwiley.net. You can always leave a comment at the show notes at connorwiley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi wiley, or leave a comment on the Facebook post or LinkedIn post at Connor Wiley, psychology author. And today's episode has been sponsored by Biological Psychology. Now, this is a great sponsor for today's episode because ketamine works by in engaging in a hope of biological psychology processes. And I'm not going to go into it because I go into it during the podcast episode, but it works on like a changing our neurotransmitters in engaging at different synaptic connections, and it really is a biological process that leads to a lot of behavioral changes. So, if you want a great, really easy to understand and in a depth look at how our biology impacts our behavior, then definitely check out this book because biological psychology explores stuff like how neurotransmitters, hormones, evolution, and so many other facets how it impacts our behavior, and I flat out love this book. Also, just buy it for the cover. The cover of Biological Psychology is stunning and it will look brilliant on your bookshelf. So that is Biological Psychology, available for all major ebook retailers, and you can order the paperback and hardback version from Amazon, your local bookstore, or local library if you request it. And if you want the audiobook narrated by artificial intelligence, then now you can, at selected audiobook retailers like Spotify, Kobo, Google Play, and Barnes& Noble, and selected library systems like Overdrive, Baker and Taylor, and Biblioteca. So, whilst buying books helps support the creation and the editing of the podcast, my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons. And as always, a massive thank you to my patrons. Your support shows that you like the show and you are wanting to continue. So, if you wanted to become a patron of the show and get access to tons of great rewards, now you can at patreon.com/, the Psychology World podcast. Or if you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, then now you can at buymeacoffee.com/, Con Whiteley. So that's enough for the personal update. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about, should you try ketamine-assisted psychotherapy? It's a great podcast episode. I learned a lot, so I know you're going to enjoy it too. So let's dive into it. Introduction to ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. Even if you haven't been paying much attention to the use of ketamine in clinical psychology circles, you might be aware that it is interestingly being used in a wide range of health settings. Up until March 2019, though, it was only really used as an anesthetic. Yet in March 2019, the United States Food and Drug Administration approved the use of ketamine for the treatment of severe depression. Also, it's worth noting that the media loves to talk about ketamine from time to time. The drug ketamine was developed in 1962 because it's a tamer version to the hallucinogen PCP, so its psychoactive effects have been known for decades. The use of ketamine can lead to alterations in thoughts, mood, sense of bodily boundaries, as well as meaning. It can lead to perceptual distortions too. Knowledge about these effects have also been confirmed by the less than 1% of Americans that use the drug recreationally. In terms of research into ketamine, uses for mental health conditions, this started in the mid-2000s, as researchers started to notice that it can have a strong and positive effect on people with depression. This led to the United States National Institute of Mental Health to affirm that ketamine is effective as an antidepressant, and medical professionals have even started to recommend ketamine to severely suicidal clients. Then in 2019, Americans started to see the first wave of ketamine clinics pop up around the United States. How does ketamine-assisted psychotherapy work in the United Kingdom? So I always enjoy looking at the cross-cultural contexts when I can. Therefore, in the United Kingdom, according to the Oxford Health NHS Foundation Trust website, ketamine can be an antidepressant, but it isn't licensed for this use by the National Health Service. Now, this is mainly because of the cost of ketamine to the NHS, instead of there being a lack of evidence on its effectiveness. Although it is possible to get self-paid ketamine service, but it's only really available to people with depression who do not really respond to other forms of psychological treatment. It costs at least £3,000 per year, and the NHS uses this money to fund NHS care in the trust. After an initial AA assessment, the initial treatment consists of 3 to 6 ketamine infusions over a 3 to 6 week period. 10% of the clients have a negative experience with their first infusion, whereas over 90% have a pleasant or neutral experience, and 50% of the clients respond well as continue with their treatment. Finally, like all antidepressant treatments, ketamine needs to be used for several years regularly in order to effectively treat severe depression. How does ketamine-assisted psychotherapy work in China? As an afterthought by me, ketamine-assisted psychotherapy works in China similar to how it works in the United Kingdom and United States. The rest of this podcast episode also applies to China in terms of effectiveness, what a session typically looks like, and how it works. China uses ketamine similar to the West in terms of treatment for severe depression and severely suicidal clients, and they mainly use it at hospitals and other treatment clinics throughout the country under the supervision of healthcare professionals. There isn't a great amount of difference between how the West and China use ketamine to treat mental health conditions. How does ketamine-assisted psychotherapy work in Australia? In Australia, a quick internet search reveals that ketamine-assisted psychotherapy seems to be much more widespread and privatised, with a wide range of healthcare settings offering ketamine treatment for depression in a wide range of different ways. Yet, the website of the Royal Melbourne Hospital explains that the clinic provides a 3-week course of low dose intravenous ketamine treatment for clients with severe depression. Nonetheless, this treatment is only available for people who are seeing mental health services or are currently engaged with a psychiatrist who is overseeing their care. In other words, you cannot simply go to the hospital or clinic and say you want ketamine assisted psychotherapy without a referral from a psychiatrist. How does ketamine assisted psychotherapy work in Brazil? So, Brazil mainly uses the global approach to ketamine, like all the other countries, like the United States, China, and the United Kingdom. Yet, Brazil uses ketamine assisted psychotherapy in hospital mental health services. They administer ketamine for treating severe depression under strict medical supervision with standard monitoring. Even though Brazil, even though there is a problem in Brazil, because as much as they would ideally like to combine ketamine and psychological therapy for their clients, this cannot always happen because the distribution of trained psychologists and other mental health professionals is so uneven in the country. In addition, when research is conducted into ketamine in Brazil, university and academic trials commonly use intravenous or intramuscular administration with hospital oversight. Finally, similar to the United States and Australia, Brazil uses ketamine assisted psychotherapy in private outpatient clinics where they typically combine a medication session with psychological therapy and assessment, even though the formality of the psychotherapy really does differ between providers. How effective is ketamine assisted psychotherapy? And there are a lot of references and citations in this next section, so I'm not going to read them out because it doesn't really work in audio. But if you go to the blog post, then you can find them all there and some further reading too, like always. Building upon this in more depth, a wide range of studies show that ketamine is an effective treatment for severe depression, and it can be useful for other mental health conditions. For example, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder, and Parkinson's disease. However, as you can probably imagine, the effects of ketamine are greatly improved if a client works alongside a therapist before, during, and after ketamine treatment. This has led to the creation of ketamine assisted psychotherapy. How does it work? So, as I explained in my podcast episode titled How Can Psychotherapy Be Combined with a Ketamine from 2022? Open quote. Ketamine engages the neurotransmitters glutamate and NMDA is a glutamate receptor, and ketamine effectively blocks these receptors from action, so it allows more glutamate to be present in the synapses of a client. Therefore, with glutamate being an excitatory neurotransmitter and GABA being an inhibitory neurotransmitter, the client's other neurotransmitters can reach an optimal homeostasis. Then this leads to a reduction in depression and anxiety symptoms, as it decreases hyperarousal as well as rumination. As a result, from a psychotherapist's perspective, this allows them to focus on the underlying event that are causing the client's affective and a cognitive dysfunction, with the client that is calmer and more able to focus constructively on finding better ways to effectively manage their condition. Close quote. Is ketamine addictive? Generally, no, ketamine is not an addictive substance, because in the United States, it is classed as a Schedule 3 controlled substance. It is a hallucinogenic and anesthetic, so it doesn't produce chemical dependency. Yet there are some people who report cravings for the feelings and sensations that ketamine gives them. Personally, I would like to remind you all that, as a side note, addiction is a treatable condition, and if you or anyone you love is experiencing any kind of addiction, then it can be useful to reach out to mental health professionals. What does a typical ketamine-assisted psychotherapy session look like? Earlier in the podcast episode, when I was exploring how different countries deal with ketamine assisted psychotherapy, you were able to see that it really does differ between the providers to some extent. Yet the core basis of ketamine treatment is that you will meet with a medical professional and they will work with you to determine dosage, eligibility, as well as a method of administration, since ketamine can be given to you intramuscularly, intranasally, sublingually, and intravenously. And in case you're like me and you don't know what sublingually mean, it is the process of giving you ketamine under the tongue. Personally, for me, the idea of anything going up your nose like a tube or spray is just awful and I would hate it. Granted, that's probably because I was on life support as a baby. I almost died within the first 3 weeks of being born, and intravenously doesn't sound great either, mainly because of that candela. Nope, I've heard my mum talk about it. Nope, I'm just not going there. And this is important to note because depending on the dosage and the method used for your treatment, this can make the treatment last between anything between 1 and 3 hours per session. Moreover, because ketamine is classified as a dissociative anesthetic, you can dissociate and disconnect from your body and your normal reality. Depending on your dosage, you are more likely to experience these effects. You might experience a mild or severe anesthetic, antidepressant effects, and analoid. Please check the blog post because I can't say that word. Like, sometimes as a podcaster, dyslexia is really not your friend, but I soldier through. This is why a trained psychotherapist will support you throughout your treatment. Then, after the ketamine has worn off, you would complete an integration phase with your therapist, and this might include some journaling, somatic art or dance therapy, or verbal reflection, or something else entirely. This section is flat out critical because it helps you to process the new insights and any new information that you've learned through your ketamine experience. Who doesn't benefit from ketamine assisted psychotherapy? If you're pregnant or nursing people, or you have a history of addiction, antisocial psychosis, or untreated hypothyroidism or hypertension, you should not do this form of psychological therapy. Who would benefit from ketamine assisted psychotherapy? People with a range of mental health conditions like anxiety, severe depression, chronic pain, and PTSD can benefit from ketamine assisted psychotherapy. The traditional treatment for these conditions is to have talking therapy and take an SSRI. And whilst it is useful for a lot of people, this doesn't work for everyone. This is why ketamine assisted psychotherapy can be useful for people who haven't responded well to other treatment options, especially because clients can see improvements in their mental health even after a single session, and they can see massive improvements after 4 to 6 sessions. Conclusion. Overall, at the end of this podcast episode, I'm really happy, excited, and pleased because I haven't looked into cross-cultural research for ages and I've missed it. I really do, because I really enjoy seeing how other countries are similar and different from one another in how they use ketamine to treat mental health conditions. And thankfully, on the podcast, we were able all continents except Africa and Antarctica. Granted, I'm pretty sure Antarctica doesn't actually use psychological treatments too much. Therefore, as a little recap, ketamine-assisted psychotherapy is shown to be an effective treatment for severe depression by a wide range of studies, and is useful for other mental health conditions too, like post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety disorders, OCD, and Parkinson's disease. And ketamine-assisted psychotherapy can be useful for people who haven't responded well to other treatments, especially because clients can see improvements in their mental health even after one session, and they can start to see improvements after 4 to 6 sessions. So, I want to end this podcast episode by asking you 3 questions. Would you ever try ketamine-assisted psychotherapy? Would you ever be interested in being trained in this form of psychotherapy? What do you think the future of ketamine-assisted psychotherapy is in your country? So, I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. Like I know that I did, because to be honest, there were a lot of different podcast episodes I was tempted to do this week. For example, the other 2 that I was thinking of doing was another ghosting related one. So why do people ghost others in the first place? And then another one was a forensic psychology podcast episode on children in custody cases. So that's something I was quite interested in. But ketamine and a so-called proper clinical psychology topic really did seal the deal for me. And it gave me a chance to look at cross-cultural mental health, which I'm always a massive fan of, and I flat out love it. So if you know anyone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And if you want to learn more, then please check out Biological Psychology, available in all the usual places, in ebook, audiobook, and hardback and paperback. And if you want to support the podcast on a monthly basis, then please check out patreon.com/the Psychology Word Podcast. Or if you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, then please head on over to buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. And as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode, so definitely reach out. So, have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at conwhiteley.net. So have a great day, and I'll see you next time.